Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me on the Slice of Technology podcast. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. Joining me today is Dr. Gurson, the co-founder and CEO at Rad AI. How's it going?
It's going well, thank you.
I'm excited to have you here. Let's dive right in. First off, for those that haven't heard of Rad AI, would love to hear more about the company, why you decided to start this company, what you do, and then just applaud you for awesome name, by the way.
Thank you. So I think the best place to start is probably with my co-founder, Jeff. So he has a bit of a unique background in that he started med school at the age of 16, then went off, got an MBA. By the time we met, he was doing graduate work in AI. So he's somebody that understood AI as well as radiology. And so that domain expertise is important if you're going to be building something in radiology. And so Rad AI, and from the very beginning, we wanted to find ways to help augment radiologists. And so we started to use LLMs back in 2018. This is way before ChatGPT hit the scene. And the reason we did this is because one of the things I learned in us doing a startup before Rad AI, Jeff and I together, again, he as a radiologist, myself as a software entrepreneur, this is my fifth startup. We went through Y Combinator for a hardware startup, and I felt like every time we ran into issues, it was because we didn't have that sort of hardware expertise. Turns out you can't treat hardware like software. It's a different, you have to be much more intentional with how you build it. And so what we found, my experience from that is domain expertise matters a ton. And so every time we talk to investors, they would say, why is a radiologist and a software entrepreneur building hardware? Like, didn't really make a lot of sense. So for this particular startup, for Rad AI, because radiology has such a specific workflow and is a unique sort of workflow, you have to really understand how radiologists work in order to be able to build the products that can help radiologists. So the first product that we built really, again, was the first sort of LLM product in radiology, maybe even healthcare, but happy to dive more into it as we go.
Yeah, it's a lot of thoughts going through my head, so I want to I want to structure them appropriately. I think when a lot of people, even most people, right, did not, the vast majority of the population didn't even know AI was really a thing until ChatGPT came out, right, and really kind of added that consumer touch to it, so people now know what the technology is. When you think though of what you're doing with AI, like some of the coolest parts are, in my opinion, in what we're using it in within healthcare. Now, I want to also address in this conversation here today some of the other sides, because I think when you talk about some of the negatives to implementing AI in healthcare, you know how they'll say sometimes there could be, we look at like even on the scan, this was more on the scan side of things, so not even necessarily AI, but people will say, look, if we're scanning or if we're doing something and we get more false positives, isn't that a bad thing? I've always viewed, I would rather have a false positive than a false negative, right? Because even if I have to investigate it more, at least I know I'm safe. But how does that impact? I'm sure you hear your fair deal of maybe concerns as well. So I'd love to start by addressing the concerns that maybe you hear, and then we can continue to focus on the positives, which, in my mind, substantially outweigh any potential negatives.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think, it doesn't have to be. So the way we've always thought about this is, especially in radiology, it's not to replace radiologists, it's actually to augment. And the way we've seen this play out is that the AI by itself is only so good, and the radiologists by themselves are only so good, and they're not perfect. So they're both not perfect. But what we found is when you combine the two, so AI plus a radiologist, that's when you get the best outcomes. And so I think it's so as we've looked at the data around this, we continue to see how our AI is helping radiologists catch errors. And quite frankly, the other piece of it too is it's reducing the burnout for radiologists because they feel like there's sort of an extra set of eyes or an extra pair of hands helping to ensure like a second look almost to make sure that they're not missing anything. And we're doing this. Ours is less about images and more about text to text because we're helping to create parts of the report. That's where radiologists spend the vast majority of their time. So I think it's a little bit, I mean, I certainly understand the concern if it is something where nobody ever reviews it. So if it's just AI doing something and a physician never looks at it and we send it off to a patient, yeah, it's too early for that kind of thing. I think that, I don't know when and if that will happen, but the idea that, again, in our case with radiologists, we're helping them generate the report customized to their style and language. So what that's doing is essentially just making their lives easier. It's still the same output they would have generated, but rather than having to generate everything from scratch every time, they review it and they sign off. So that's the part that I think it's a departure from I think what other companies have tried to do, which is more just on the diagnostic side. Um, but I think that's where the real value is at because 75% of a radiologist's time is spent generating the report. So imagine it's not looking at the image, it's generating the report, the paperwork that takes all the time.
Can you, for our audience, can you explain um, the information that is in maybe one of these reports, but then also kind of say, okay, before Rad AI, this is how the process looked like, and now this is what it looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, when a radiologist is looking at an exam, so they're viewing the image, they have a speech to text microphone, and they're using that within reporting software to generate that report. So they'll start by dictating out what they're seeing in the image, and they'll comment on each section of, so they might comment on each body part. So they're structured reports versus unstructured, but for the sake of this conversation, it's sort of they go through and they identify what they're seeing in the image. And once they're done identifying what they're seeing, they create what's called an impression or a summary of what's happening in the text fields. Because a lot of the things are going to be normal, but they still want to highlight that it's normal. So when you create the summary, you want to create the summary in a way that the referring physician in this case is going to be able to read this and understand sort of what's really happening, and they'll read that summary to understand, like get an overview, and then they can dive into the details if they'd like to. And so what we do is we take the top part and then we automatically create the summary for them customized to that radiologist. And I can't overemphasize how important the customized piece is, but because each radiologist has been trained a certain way, they all have their different style. It's just like each of us have a different way of writing a story or like a memo, right? We're all going to have a different style. And so for radiologists, they also have their own style of writing, which we can basically capture as we create that impression for them automatically. So we create the impression for them automatically. So before that, they would have had to also use speech to text to generate the impression. Now, when they drop into the impression section, it just instantly happens for them.
You mentioned how important the customized piece is. Do you think in healthcare in general, we often try maybe too often to kind of take that one size fits all approach to certain things? Because like that's when I talk to a lot of clinicians out there, it seems like when new software gets kind of added into their workflow, they feel like in many cases they have to kind of change how they maybe do things to adapt to the software. And kind of what you're saying is you recognize that customization is so important, right? With what these reports are dealing with.
Yeah, because especially with radiologists, they're trying to convey something a certain way, and I think it is important to make sure you're capturing that. Now, you certainly have a lot of folks in radiology who are also pushing for more standardization in some of these areas, which I think is also uh, can be valuable as well. So there's a little bit of, it's sort of an and here. I think, you can have a little bit of both of these things without going too far to each direction.
Outside of Rad AI, are there other use cases of AI within healthcare that you're particularly bullish on?
I mean, I just think there are so many different areas right now, especially even in the sort of the clinical notes space, that's another one where there's a lot of, I think, excitement around that. Again, it's sort of the paperwork of radiology, or in that case, the paperwork physicians need to create. So if you can reduce the paperwork and have AI kind of doing most of that, again, I would expect the physician to review it and make sure everything is right. But over time, I think those will get better and better. And even if it saves them, maybe 20 or 30% of the day, that's still huge. And it would allow, I think, physicians to spend more time with patients. Same thing in radiology, but there are lots of I'm excited about. There's so many different areas I think that could be exciting. There's also even outside of radiology, just the whole personal assistant piece of it. I feel like for me, as I see LLMs develop and AI developing, I sort of see this as not necessarily replacing people, but making people sort of the best versions of themselves for work, at least, right? And even maybe in your personal life, if it can do things for you that you don't want to spend time doing. I'd say, my day, probably the vast majority of it is just done sort of doing these tasks that need to be done. But is it really me that has to push all these buttons? I'd argue it's not. I'd love to be able to just sort of articulate to the AI what I'm trying to do. And a lot of times it's just like, it might be something like, email Jared and, tell him I'm going to be 10 minutes late or something. I shouldn't have to open up my email, go in there, do all this. It should just be able to like know that the intent is that. And that's kind of how we're building our reporting software for radiology. It's intent driven. So it's not just speech to text, which is historically what we've seen in radiology reporting. It's more the radiologist giving us the intent, and then we take that intent and then we create the report customized to their style and language. So same thing in, I think, other areas. Personal assistants, I think, are going to be an exciting one.
I think everyone kind of benchmarks a personal assistant too against like the Iron Man movies, right? With Jarvis to be able to like dictate, but I'm with you there. Like I'm still not seeing that with many of the platforms out there, right? I think we're getting closer and closer, but in order for that, like in order to send those emails and everything and also kind of augment most of our workflows, it's going to have to be with a high, like even higher degree of certainty, right? Because I think like we also need more information, right? Like if the AI is going through, I use Superhuman for my email. I switched over last year, right? So they released a new feature. It's not the talk and it'll send a message, right? But it starts to understand my writing style. Now I haven't used it as much as I probably will in the future, but and it'll already give me kind of which is nothing. This part's nothing new, right? It'll actually give me potential responses based on what I've said to past emails. But I think what you were saying with the intent, we need to also have more information, right? Of have I talked to this person before in the past? Because it'll also want to reference past conversations, right? Like. How far in your mind though are we? We are so much closer now than we were even a year ago or even 6 months ago. The speed at which this technology is moving forward is crazy. I guess, sorry, side question. How do people like yourself, how do you prepare for how fast this technology is moving and what you're building?
I mean, I think a lot of this sort of boils down to just building some things that, for us, it's about building a little bit more of a platform upon which, so regardless of how quickly technology moves, I think we could take advantage of the speed at which technology is moving because we're building more of sort of an infrastructure platform around radiology in particular. So the faster things move, the better in some ways. Now, it still needs to be, I think, tested and ensure that like the right people are making decisions. In this case, I think important to have physicians in the loop on a lot of this stuff. And something that's made Rad AI unique is, we have 7 physicians on our team, including, so I think 6 radiologists now on our team. And for company with 130 people, having 6 radiologists is actually a lot, relatively speaking. And so I think a lot of this in healthcare in particular, it is important to include physicians because they really understand sort of what's going on and the patients they care for. So they should be a little bit of sort of the gatekeepers in these types of things versus because oftentimes what I've seen is and I consider myself a bit of a software engineer too, so nothing against engineers, but oftentimes what happens is you have engineers coming into the space solving an engineering problem, but they don't understand how it fits in, especially in radiology. They don't understand how it fits into radiology, so they end up building things that radiologists can't use or don't want to use. And so I think there's a little bit of that piece of it that's important to make sure that physicians sort of are in the driver's seat as things progress. But I'm excited about all the new developments. If we could make them faster, smarter, better, I think those are all going to be big wins.
One of my favorite things that now AI really allows for, though, is because you were talking about how you consider yourself more of a kind of software engineer, right? So, and how we tend to build things, engineers tend to build things because it solves like an engineering problem. I love how AI has allowed others, like I don't think it's still as far along as some people are saying, like you talk to it and it will code everything for you, right? Like it's still not there yet, and it might never fully be there. Like let's augment to make it so that people that maybe don't have an engineering background can now speak more engineering language, or at least articulate, and now you can have better conversations with your engineers as a result. But I think you'll see a lot more of that where basically, I had this conversation with the CEO of HackerOne the other day. We were talking about how we're kind of in our sci-fi era, where if you can imagine it, you can almost create it, right? Or at least create more things are possible than ever before, I guess is kind of the thing. And yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting to see how things are progressing. And I think AI just allows a lot of people to get maybe out of their own way too and get their thoughts out there and kind of come up with a better plan, right?
No, you're right. And I think one of the other interesting areas too, like as you think about how to be most efficient with our time and just our mental energy and being able to, I just heard of this recently where, you can ingest a whole bunch of research papers and they kind of just get like almost a podcast version of it. It sounds very lifelike. So I thought that was very interesting. And then just being able to sort of query and ask questions about the research paper rather than having to read all 50 papers, you kind of can get like a gist of it and then figure out if you want to dive in further. And I actually, it's funny because I heard on the coding front, I just yesterday heard someone talking about how rather than having to read like each individual line of code, they're basically working on stuff that will just sort of summarize like what the code is doing, and then you will have a better sense. And again, you can dive in and like read the code if you want to, but it's much more efficient to kind of get a summary of what the code is doing than trying to like read the code itself. You can get a better sense of, and then I think it'll just make again programmers or folks who are developing software will just get better because they have better tools to do their craft. I don't think it's gonna eliminate software, and you still have to have the right way of thinking about software, at least today, to build anything. Even if you want to talk about it, you're still going to have to think about it in a systems like thinking sort of way.
I do think what it's going to do too is software develop. The speed at which you can develop new features is going to increase drastically, because now, to your point, the developers will be able to, for the stuff that you're adding all these up, right? If they're saving a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there, over the course of a year or over the course of a project, that is like some serious developer time, right? That can be refocused. I also like there was parts that developers, would have to spend time on that, for the basic things that AI will be able to help get up and running so they can focus more on the complex engineering problems that they actually want to solve, which I think will be cool for them.
You know what's funny, Jared? The reason I chuckled is because the same sort of thing exists in so many industries. The same thing is actually true for radiologists. Like there are some types of exams that are just like pretty simple exams, and they don't want to do those. They kind of like they want to do the interesting stuff. And I think this is true of all professions. People want to focus on the interesting stuff. I feel like if AI can help reduce a little bit more of the maybe the boring tasks or the boring parts of the task, then that's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, that's why when people say like, "Oh no, AI is going to get rid of my job," AI is going to get rid of your job as you like the parts of your job as you know it today, and you still have to adapt. If you're not learning the new, so people are going to have to get a little uncomfortable to get comfortable again, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is fine. But last question for you. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something else?
Well, what? Yeah, it's funny in radiology. I've heard folks say that AI is not going to replace radiologists, but radiologists that use AI will replace radiologists that don't, basically. And so that's probably true again, I think probably for software development and most other industries as well. So you're going to have to learn to use AI, but it's like anything. Some folks, it's like learning to use a computer. You had to do it if you wanted to kind of be competing for jobs in this era.
That's why it's so funny when you have these people that kind of put it out there as for like they're kind of trying to get some press out of it, right? Where they say we're not implementing any AI features into our software. This is a non-AI company, and it's like,
Oh, yeah, come
I'm
on.
sure it's going to work out real well for you.
No, that is not. Yeah, that will not work.
Last question for you as we wrap up here. What are you most looking forward to from the Human X conference?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there are so many great speakers there that I'm just sort of curious to see what is the next frontier, like where is this all headed? And I have had the opportunity, like I was at an Anthropic event yesterday, just hearing more about what they're doing. I've had an opportunity to hear just some of the stuff that OpenAI is also doing. There's so many companies now and so much money and investment going into AI that I'm sure I'm only getting like a very small glimpse of what is actually happening out there. And so I can't wait to hear from other folks at the Human X conference, like what they're working on and what they find interesting, because that to me helps inform the way that I think about where these trends might be headed. Because I think there is no uniform, I think, view on where this is headed. It's definitely different folks have different points of view, some on the safety side, some on just sort of maybe like the even labor side of it. So there's just so many different points of view, what people are thinking about or worried about, that I can't wait to hear all the different perspectives at Human X.
I agree. I'm so looking forward to it. It's going to be a great event, great speakers, and super excited that this is now a thing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me here today. Looking forward to future conversations and wishing you and the team all the best of luck, but love what you're building.
Thank you for the time, Jared. This was great. I really enjoyed it and look forward to seeing you again soon.